about our stories.
You are driving alone on a stretch of highway that does not seem to end, and the only light comes from your headlights cutting through the thick fog. It is 3 in the morning. You have not seen another car for over an hour. You are tired and your eyes are starting to play tricks on you. You see shadows darting across the road, but when you look closer, there is nothing there. This is how it starts. This is how the nightmare begins for a man named David. David was a software engineer from Chicago who needed a break from the city. He had rented a large cabin in the remote woods of northern Minnesota near the Canadian border. The listing promised total isolation and silence. That was exactly what David wanted. He wanted to disconnect from the world. He wanted to sleep. He wanted to forget the stress of his job. But the silence of the woods is not like the silence of a room. The woods are never truly quiet. They are always watching. David arrived at the cabin late on a Tuesday night. The gravel driveway was long and winding. The trees on either side were tall and thick. They blocked out the moon and the stars. The cabin was a large wooden structure with a wraparound porch. It looked beautiful, but also lonely. David parked his car and stepped out. The air was cold and smelled of pine needles and damp earth. He grabbed his bags and went inside. The interior was cozy. There was a large stone fireplace and comfortable furniture, a kitchen with modern appliances, a staircase leading up to a loft bedroom. David felt a sense of relief. He locked the front door and threw his keys on the table. He was finally alone. He made himself a sandwich and sat by the window. It was pitch black outside. He could not see anything past the glass. It felt like looking into an endless void. He went to bed early that night. The bed was soft and warm. He fell asleep quickly, but his sleep was not peaceful. He dreamed of the woods. In his dream, he was standing in the middle of the trees. It was dark, but he could see eyes glowing in the shadows. Dozens of them. Watching him, he woke up with a start. He was sweating. The room was cold. He looked at the clock. It was 3:30 in the morning. Then he heard it. A sound from downstairs. It was a soft thud, like a heavy book falling onto the floor. David froze. He held his breath. He listened. The cabin was silent again. He told himself it was just the house settling. Old wood makes noise. It was normal. He tried to go back to sleep, but his heart was pounding. 10 minutes passed. Then he heard it again. This time it was different. It was the sound of footsteps. Slow and deliberate footsteps. They were on the porch. David sat up in bed. He knew he had locked the door. He was sure of it. He quietly got out of bed and walked to the edge of the loft. He looked down into the living room. It was dark down there. The only light came from the moonlight filtering through the high windows. He could not see anyone inside. The footsteps on the porch stopped. David waited. He wondered if it was an animal, a bear or a deer. But the steps had sounded heavy. They sounded like boots. He crept down the stairs. The wood creaked under his feet. He winced at the sound. He reached the bottom and walked to the front door. He looked through the peephole. There was nothing there, just the empty porch and the dark driveway. David let out a breath he did not know he was holding. He checked the lock. It was still secure. He went to the kitchen and drank a glass of water. He convinced himself it was just his imagination. The isolation was getting to him. He went back to bed and eventually fell asleep. The next morning the sun was shining. The woods looked less threatening in the daylight. Birds were singing. The air was crisp. David laughed at himself for being so scared the night before. He spent the day hiking on the trails near the cabin. He took photos of the trees and the lake. He felt relaxed. He felt happy. He returned to the cabin in the late afternoon. As he walked up the steps to the porch, he stopped. He looked down at the floorboards. There were muddy footprints. They started at the stairs and went all the way to the door. They were large boot prints, but David was wearing running shoes, and his shoes were clean. A cold chill ran down his spine. Someone had been on the porch. Someone had stood right in front of the door. David looked around the clearing. The trees stood still and silent. He felt like he was being watched again. He quickly unlocked the door and went inside. He locked it behind him and also slid the deadbolt. He checked the back door. It was locked. He checked all the windows. They were secure. He tried to distract himself. He read a book. He watched a movie on his laptop. But as the sun began to set, the fear returned. The shadows in the cabin grew longer. The darkness outside pressed against the glass. He closed all the curtains. He turned on every light in the house. He did not want to see the dark. Dinner was tasteless. He could not eat. He sat in the living room with a heavy flashlight in his hand. He waited. He did not know what he was waiting for, but he knew something was wrong. The clock ticked loudly on the wall. 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock. Nothing happened. The house was quiet. David started to feel foolish again. Maybe the footprints were from the owner of the cabin. Maybe they had stopped by while he was hiking to check on something. He tried to rationalize it. He decided to go to bed. He turned off the downstairs lights and went up to the loft. He lay down but kept the flashlight on the nightstand. He dozed off for a while. Then the sound woke him up. It was distinct. It was the sound of the front doorknob turning, jiggling back and forth. Someone was trying to get in. David sat up. He grabbed the flashlight. He listened. The jiggling stopped, then a heavy thud against the wood. Someone had thrown their shoulder against the door. The house shook slightly. David's heart hammered in his chest. He grabbed his phone to call the police. He looked at the screen. No signal. He stared at the bars in disbelief. He had full service yesterday. He moved around the room trying to find a signal. Nothing. The line was dead. Suddenly, a loud crash came from downstairs. The sound of glass breaking. It came from the kitchen. Someone had broken a window. David scrambled back to the corner of the loft. He could hear the glass crunching on the floor. Then the sound of a window sliding up. Someone was climbing inside. David held the flashlight like a weapon. He knew he was trapped. The loft had no other exit. He had to defend the stairs. He heard heavy boots walking on the kitchen tile. Then the footsteps moved to the wooden floor of the living room. They were slow, heavy, wet, David shouted. He yelled for whoever it was to get out. He said he had a gun. It was a lie, but he hoped it would scare them. The footsteps stopped. Silence filled the cabin. David waited. He pointed the light at the top of the stairs. A voice came from the darkness below. It was a low, raspy voice. It sounded like dry leaves scraping together. The voice said David's name. It simply said David. David froze. He had never told anyone he was coming here. He had booked the cabin under a company name. No one knew he was here. He asked who it was. The voice did not answer. Instead, the footsteps started again. They were coming towards the stairs. David turned on the flashlight and aimed it down. The beam cut through the darkness. It revealed the bottom of the staircase. Standing there was a man. He was tall and wore a dirty green raincoat. He had a hood pulled up over his head. His face was in shadow. He was dripping wet, but it was not raining outside. The man took a step up the stairs. David yelled again. He told the man to stop. The man did not stop. He took another step. He was holding something in his hand. It was a long hunting knife. The metal glinted in the flashlight beam. David looked around for a weapon. He grabbed a heavy lamp from the bedside table. He ripped the cord from the wall. The man was halfway up the stairs now. He was moving with a strange, jerky motion, like a puppet on strings. David threw the lamp. It hit the man in the chest. The man did not even flinch. He just kept coming. David backed up until he hit the wall. The man reached the top of the stairs. He stepped onto the loft floor. He was huge. He filled the space. He slowly reached up and pulled back his hood. David screamed. The man had no face. It was just smooth, pale skin. No eyes, no nose, no mouth. Just a blank slate. Yet the voice came again. It seemed to come from everywhere at once. It said David's name again. David threw the flashlight at the creature and ran. He tried to squeeze past it to get to the stairs. The creature grabbed him. Its grip was like iron. It was freezing cold. David struggled. He kicked and punched. He managed to break free and tumbled down the stairs. He hit the floor hard. Pain shot through his shoulder. He scrambled to his feet. He ran to the front door. He fumbled with the locks. His hands were shaking so badly he could barely turn the deadbolt. He heard the creature walking above him. Then he heard it jump. It landed on the floor behind him with a heavy thud. David got the door open. He burst out into the night air. He ran to his car. He dug in his pocket for his keys. He dropped them in the gravel. He fell to his knees, searching frantically. He could hear the creature stepping onto the porch. He found the keys. He unlocked the car and jumped in. He slammed the door and locked it. He jammed the key into the ignition. The engine sputtered. It did not start. He tried again. The engine whined but did not catch. He looked out the window. The creature was standing on the porch. It was pointing at him. David tried the car one more time. It roared to life. He threw it into reverse and backed out of the driveway. He spun the wheel and tore down the gravel road. He did not look back. He drove as fast as he could. He drove until he hit the paved highway. He drove until he saw the lights of a gas station. He pulled in and ran inside. The attendant was an old man reading a newspaper. He looked up in surprise as David burst in. David was pale and shaking. He told the man he needed help. He told him someone had attacked him at the cabin. The old man listened quietly. He did not look surprised. The old man asked which cabin it was. David told him the location. The old man's face went pale. He told David that cabin had burned down 10 years ago. No one lived there. No one rented it out. David insisted he was wrong. He said he had just been there. He had slept in the bed. He had used the kitchen. The old man shook his head. He told David to go look in the mirror in the bathroom. David was confused, but he went. He walked into the small restroom and looked in the dirty mirror. He gasped. His face was covered in scratches, but that was not the worst part. On his forehead, written in ash, was a single word. The word was run. David ran out of the bathroom. The attendant was on the phone with the police. David did not wait. He got back in his car and drove. He drove all night. He did not stop until he was back in Chicago. He never went back to the woods. He never went camping again. But the story does not end there. David tried to move on with his life. He went back to work. He tried to forget the face of the man with no eyes. But strange things started happening in his apartment in the city. He would come home and find his furniture moved. He would hear footsteps in the hallway when no one was there. One night, he woke up to the sound of dripping water. He went to the bathroom. The tap was running. He turned it off. He looked in the mirror. Behind him in the reflection, standing in the bathtub, was the man in the green raincoat. David spun around. The tub was empty. He started losing sleep. He started losing his mind. He felt like he was still in the cabin. He felt like he had never left. He began to wonder if he had actually escaped. What if he was still in the woods? What if this life in Chicago was just a dream, a hallucination to keep him calm while the creature fed on him? He went to a doctor. The doctor gave him pills for anxiety. They did not help. The visions got worse. He saw the faceless man in the crowd on the subway. He saw him standing on street corners. He saw him in the reflection of store windows. The creature was following him, or maybe it was already with him. 6 months after the incident, David disappeared. His apartment was found empty. The door was locked from the inside. There was no sign of a struggle. His car was still in the garage. His phone and wallet were on the table. The only clue was a message scrawled on the living room wall. It was written in charcoal. It said simply, "I am awake now." Police investigated but found nothing. David was gone. His friends and family were devastated. They searched for months. They put up posters. They hired private investigators. But David had vanished into thin air. 2 years later, a group of teenagers went camping in northern Minnesota. They were hiking off the main trails. They found an old burned-out ruin of a cabin. The wood was black and charred. Plants were growing through the floorboards. It looked like it had been destroyed for a long time. One of the teenagers found something in the rubble. It was a journal. The cover was burnt, but the pages inside were readable. He picked it up and started reading. The handwriting was frantic and messy. It detailed a man's descent into madness. The man wrote about a cabin that wasn't there. He wrote about a creature with no face. He wrote about waking up in a hospital bed only to realize the hospital was made of trees. The last entry in the journal was dated the day the teenagers found it. The ink was still wet. It read, "I hear them coming. They are not human. They are the woods. Do not look at them. Do not let them in." If you are reading this, you are already part of the story. The teenager dropped the book. He looked around. The woods were silent. Too silent. Then he heard it, the sound of a twig snapping. He looked at his friends. They were all looking into the trees. Standing at the edge of the clearing was a man in a green raincoat. He was dripping wet. The teenagers ran. They ran until their lungs burned. They made it back to their car and drove away. They went to the police station in the nearest town. They told the sheriff what they saw. The sheriff listened with a grim expression. He told them to go home and never come back. When the teenagers left, the sheriff opened a drawer in his desk. Inside was a stack of missing persons flyers. On the top of the stack was a picture of David, and underneath that was a picture of the teenager who had just left the office. The sheriff took a red pen and drew a circle around the teenager's face. He whispered to himself, "Another one for the collection." The truth about the woods is not that they are haunted. It is something much worse. There are places in America where the map is wrong, places where reality is thin. The cabin David found was a trap. It was a living thing. It creates a lure to bring people in. It uses their memories to build a world that seems real. David never escaped the cabin, the car ride, the gas station, the return to Chicago. It was all part of the illusion. The creature fed on his hope. It let him believe he was safe, so his fear would be sweeter when it returned. The creature in the green raincoat was not a monster. It was the digestion process. The teenagers who found the journal were real, but they made a mistake. They touched the journal. They read the words. By doing so, they invited the story into their minds. The virus spreads through knowledge. Once you know about the man in the raincoat, he knows about you. You might be wondering why I am telling you this. You are sitting there listening to this story. You think it is just fiction. You think you are safe in your home or your car, but look around you. Is the room a little darker than it was before? Is there a sound you can't quite identify? Maybe a dripping tap or a creak in the floorboard? Remember the rule. Once you know about him, he knows about you. Do not look in the mirror tonight. Do not look out the window if you hear a noise. And if you see a man in a green raincoat standing in the rain, do not run. It is already too late. The terrifying part is not the monster, it is the uncertainty. You can never be sure if you are awake or if you are dreaming. David thought he was awake. He thought he was living his life, but he was just a battery fueling a nightmare. There is a town in Oregon that does not exist on any map. It is called Blackwood Falls. If you are driving on the highway and you see a sign for it, do not turn. Keep driving. Even if you are running out of gas, even if your car is breaking down, walk if you have to, just do not enter the town. A woman named Sarah made that mistake. She was driving from Seattle to Portland. She wanted to take a scenic route. She saw the sign for Blackwood Falls. It looked like a quaint little town. She turned off the highway. The road was paved and smooth. The trees were tall and green. She drove for 10 miles. She did not see any houses, just trees. Then the road ended. It did not fade into dirt. It just stopped. There was a solid wall of dense forest in front of her. She tried to turn around, but when she looked in her rearview mirror, the road behind her was gone. It was just more trees. She was trapped in a box made of pine and cedar. She got out of her car. She screamed for help. The trees absorbed the sound. She walked into the woods, hoping to find a path. She walked for hours. She found a clearing. In the center of the clearing was a table. On the table was a plate of food. It was hot, steaming. Sarah was starving. She sat down and ate. It was the best meal she had ever tasted. When she finished, she felt sleepy. She lay down on the soft grass. She closed her eyes. When she woke up, she was in a bed. She was in a room that looked like her childhood bedroom. Her posters were on the wall. Her toys were on the shelf. Her mother walked in. She looked young and happy. She told Sarah breakfast was ready. Sarah cried with joy. She thought she was home. She thought the woods were a bad dream. She lived in that house for years. She grew up again. She went to school. She got married. She had children. She lived a full and happy life. But sometimes she would see things the edges of the world would blur. The sky would turn the color of dead leaves. Her husband's face would briefly turn into smooth skin with no eyes. She would blink and it would be normal again. She pushed the thoughts away. She wanted to be happy. One day when Sarah was an old woman, she was sitting on her porch. Her granddaughter was playing in the yard. The little girl found something in the grass. She brought it to Sarah. It was a set of car keys. They were rusted and old. Sarah looked at them. She recognized the keychain. It was hers from when she was 20 years old. The memories came crashing back. The road, the wall of trees, the clearing. the food. She realized the truth. She had never left the clearing. She had been asleep for 50 years. Her life was a lie. Her family was a lie. Her husband and children were just figments of the forest's imagination. She looked up at the sky. It tore open like wet paper. Behind the blue sky was the dark canopy of the forest. She looked at her granddaughter. The little girl smiled. Her face melted away, revealing the blank skin of the creature. The girl spoke in the raspy voice of dry leaves. She said thank you for the meal. Sarah woke up. She was back in the clearing. She was lying on the grass. But she was not 20 anymore. She was old and withered. Her body was frail. She tried to stand, but she could not. Vines had grown over her legs. They had rooted her to the ground. She looked at her car. It was a rusted shell covered in moss. She had been there for decades. The forest had fed on her life force while she dreamed. She was too weak to fight. She closed her eyes and let the moss take her. She became part of the forest, another tree in the wall. So when you are driving and you see a road that looks too perfect or a town that feels too inviting, remember Sarah, remember David. The world is full of traps, predators that do not hunt with teeth and claws, but with dreams and desires. They give you what you want so they can take what you have. The scariest stories are not the ones about ghosts or demons. They are the ones about losing yourself, about forgetting who you are. About waking up one day and realizing that nothing you know is real. Now, let's talk about you again. You are still listening. You are still safe. Or so you think. Have you checked the doors lately? Have you looked under the bed? I am sure it is fine, but maybe, just maybe, you should turn on a light. There is a phenomenon known as the doppelganger effect. It is the idea that everyone has a double somewhere in the world, a perfect copy. Usually it is just a coincidence, someone who looks like you, but sometimes it is not a coincidence. Sometimes the copy is looking for you. There was a man named Michael in Texas. He was a truck driver. He spent his life on the road. One night he was at a truck stop in Arizona. He was washing his face in the bathroom. He looked up at the mirror. The man in the reflection was not moving. Michael was drying his face with a towel, but the reflection was just staring at him. Michael froze. He waved his hand. The reflection did not move. He touched the glass. The glass was cold. The reflection smiled. It was a cruel, twisted smile. Then the reflection walked away. It walked out of the frame of the mirror, leaving Michael looking at an empty bathroom in the glass. The bathroom was empty. He was alone. He ran out to his truck. He locked the doors. He sat there, shaking. He drove away as fast as he could. He thought he was going crazy. But then he started seeing himself. He would be driving down the highway and he would see a truck identical to his driving in the other lane. And driving it was a man who looked exactly like him. The other Michael would wave, a friendly wave. Michael would stare in horror. It happened more and more. He would walk into a diner and see himself sitting in a booth eating a burger. The other Michael would wink at him. Michael stopped sleeping. He stopped eating. He knew the other Michael was getting stronger. He looked healthier, happier, while the real Michael was wasting away. It came to a head one night in a motel room. Michael was lying in bed with a gun in his hand. He was waiting. The door opened. The other Michael walked in. He did not break the door down. He had a key. He walked in whistling a tune. He looked at the real Michael on the bed. "You look tired," the copy said. "You should rest. I can take over from here." Michael raised the gun. He fired. The bullet hit the copy in the chest. The copy did not bleed. It shattered like glass. Thousands of pieces of glass fell to the floor. Michael watched in shock, but then the pieces started to move. They flowed together like liquid mercury. They reformed, but they did not reform into a man. They reformed into a shadow, a dark three-dimensional shadow. It lunged at Michael. It engulfed him. The next morning, Michael walked out of the motel room. He looked well rested. He looked happy. He whistled a tune as he walked to his truck. He climbed in and drove away. The gun lay on the floor of the room. Beside it was a pile of dust. That was all that was left of the real Michael. The copy is still out there, driving the highways, living Michael's life. And he is not the only one. They are replacing us, one by one, quietly, without a fight. They want our lives. They want our warmth. They are cold and hollow, and they want to be filled. How well do you know your family? Your friends? Do they seem a little different lately? Did your spouse forget a shared memory? Did your friend use a word they never use? Maybe they are just tired, or maybe they have been replaced. There is a test you can do, a way to tell if someone is a mimic. Ask them about a dream they had. Mimics cannot dream. They can only copy reality. They do not have an imagination. If they cannot tell you a dream, be careful. Keep your distance. This brings us to the final story. A story about a hospital in rural West Virginia. It was an old brick building on top of a hill. It had been there for 100 years. Locals said it was cursed. They said people went in, but they did not come out. A young nurse named Emily started working there. She was fresh out of school. She was eager to help. She was assigned to the night shift on the 4th floor, the psychiatric ward. It was a quiet ward. Most of the patients were sedated. Her first night was uneventful. She did her rounds. She checked the charts. Everything was normal. But on the second night, she noticed something strange. The patients all had the same look in their eyes, a look of absolute terror. They would not speak. They would just stare at the air vents. Emily asked the head nurse about it. The head nurse was a stern woman named Mrs. Graves. Mrs. Graves told her to ignore it. She said the patients were just hallucinating, but Emily could not ignore it. She felt the fear in the air. It was thick and heavy. One night, Emily was sitting at the nurse's station. It was 3 a.m. The hallway was dark. She heard a noise coming from room 402. Room 402 was supposed to be empty. She grabbed her flashlight and walked down the hall. The floor tiles were cold and cracked. She reached the door. It was slightly ajar. She pushed it open. The room was dark. She shined her light around. The bed was empty. The closet was empty. She turned to leave. Then she heard breathing. It was coming from the ceiling. She looked up. In the corner of the room, clinging to the ceiling like a spider, was a man. He was wearing a patient's gown. His limbs were elongated and twisted. His neck was broken at an impossible angle. His head was hanging down, looking at her. Emily screamed. She dropped the flashlight. The room went dark. She heard the creature drop to the floor. She ran back to the nurse's station. She yelled for Mrs. Graves, but the station was empty. The phone lines were dead. The elevator was not working. She ran to the stairwell. She threw open the door and started running down. She ran down 1 flight, 2 flights, 3 flights. She should have reached the ground floor, but the stairs kept going. She ran down 10 flights, 20 flights. The numbers on the walls kept repeating. Floor 4, floor 4, floor 4. She was trapped in a loop. She sat down on the steps and cried. She heard the door above her open, then the sound of wet slapping footsteps coming down the stairs. The creature was coming. Emily stood up. She looked over the railing. It was a straight drop down into darkness. She could not see the bottom. The footsteps got closer. She made a choice. She would not let that thing touch her. She climbed over the railing and let go. She fell. She fell for what felt like minutes. Then she hit something. It was soft, bouncy. She opened her eyes. She was in a bed. She was in a hospital room. Sunlight was streaming through the window. A doctor was standing over her. He told her she had been in a car accident. She had been in a coma for 3 weeks. Emily was relieved. It was just a dream, a coma nightmare. She was safe. She recovered. She went home. She got back to her life. But then she noticed the vents in her apartment. They looked exactly like the vents in the hospital, and late at night, when the city was quiet, she could hear breathing coming from them. And sometimes when she walked down the stairs in her building, she would look at the floor numbers, and for a split second they would all say floor 4. Emily realized the truth. She never woke up. She is still falling. Or worse, she is still in the room with the creature, and this reality is just a way for her mind to cope with the pain. We are all fragile. Our grasp on reality is slippery. A bad dream can ruin your day. A bad memory can ruin your life. But what if the bad dream is the real world? What if the monsters are the ones waking us up? The USA is a big place. There are miles of empty roads, dense forests, abandoned towns, deep lakes. There are plenty of places to hide, and plenty of places to disappear. Next time you are on a road trip and you see a lonely figure walking on the side of the highway, do not stop. Do not offer them a ride. They might look like a person in need, but they might be something else, something ancient, something hungry. And if you are ever in a cabin in the woods and you hear 3 knocks on the door, do not answer it. Do not look through the peephole. Just sit very still. Hold your breath and pray that it goes away, because if you acknowledge it, you invite it in. And remember the man in the green raincoat. He is still out there, walking the back roads, looking for his next story, looking for you. The end. Or perhaps just the beginning. Sleep well.